Okay, guys, I'm here with my friend Bernardo Faria. Huge honor for me. Good to see you, Bernardo.
Sorry, take two on that. One of the great questions that any jiu-jitsu athlete has to ask themselves is, well, what are the takedowns and skills that are most appropriate for the sport of jiu-jitsu? Okay. There are many fine grappling arts that specialize in the standing position. You've got judo, sambo, wrestling, etc., various kinds of wrestling, and all of them do a fantastic job in the standing position. And a natural question to ask is, well, jiu-jitsu doesn't really emphasize the standing position, but matches start standing, and during the course of a 10-minute match, there's often times where the two athletes rise from the floor and they're both standing for a period of time. It's a common thing, and we need some kind of standing skills. It may not be the most important skill in a standing position, but it can be a crucial skill. In addition, there's also the brute fact that jiu-jitsu as a self-defense art begins with takedowns. The first step of the jiu-jitsu system is to take your opponent to the ground. And so even though takedowns in sport jiu-jitsu are an option, they're a choice on your part. In a self-defense aspect, they're pretty much a necessity. You need to be able to put someone down on the floor. We'll be investigating all of those themes in the first volume of the Feet to Floor series. But the first thing, when you're first starting out and you're more involved in the sport aspect of jiu-jitsu, is, well, out of all these various grappling arts, which of the takedowns are the most appropriate for the sport of jiu-jitsu? Because the rules, the directives, the stances, the distances are very different in jiu-jitsu than they are in sports like wrestling, judo, sambo, etc. So what I wanted to do is to show you guys the 6 criteria that I use for selecting the most appropriate takedowns for the sport of jiu-jitsu, and how these get used in the Feet to Floor series as we go through the various techniques in the standing position. Now, Bernardo, I don't want your toe getting hurt here, buddy. So, why don't you take a seat in the corner so Giancarlo and I will work. Okay, the first thing we want to do is you want to look at, okay, what are the criteria by which we judge how appropriate a takedown is for the special conditions of jiu-jitsu, okay? Takedowns that are perfect for the sport of judo may not be perfect for the sport of jiu-jitsu. Takedowns that are perfect for the sport of wrestling may not be perfect for the sport of jiu-jitsu, etc. So let's start looking at some criteria. The first criteria that I always use when it's time to judge how appropriate a technique is for the sport of jiu-jitsu is back exposure. How much does the takedown expose my back to my opponent? Everyone knows in any combat sport, someone getting behind you is never a good thing. It's particularly bad in the sport of jiu-jitsu, okay? If I go and expose my back in judo and my opponent gets 2 hooks in on me, it's not that bad. My opponent doesn't score any points, and within 3 to 4 seconds, if nothing happens, the referee will intervene and we get separated, we just start again. In jiu-jitsu, the referee is not going to help you. He's not going to come in, he's not going to intervene on your behalf, and now your opponent has just scored the maximum points, 4 points, and you're in deep trouble. Your opponent's behind you in a position to finish you and strangle you, and the match has barely begun. So let's have a look at this. A throw which scores very, very prominently in the sport of judo, also in wrestling and sambo too, is drop seoi-nage. We'll look at an ippon drop seoi-nage. Here, there's a huge amount of back exposure. As we come out and our opponent gets grips on us, as we go in over the top and start moving our training partner, if I go inside my training partner's legs with any form of seoi-nage, I'm like so, I'm between my training partner's legs. So as I go to finish the throw, even if I'm successful with the finish of the throw and I turn and torque my body, look how Giancarlo's hooks go in. And even though I got the throw, it didn't really mean much. Here, I scored 0 points in jiu-jitsu. In judo, I may well have won the match because I touched his back with momentum on the floor. But in jiu-jitsu, I scored 0 points for this. He scored 4 points, and now he's in a position to finish me. Okay? So that would be a good outcome in judo, but a lousy outcome in the sport of jiu-jitsu. So that would be a good example of back exposure really working against you. Okay, now let's understand, guys, back exposure comes in degrees. That was the worst kind of back exposure because I landed between my opponent's legs. Now let's look at a more partial back exposure. Okay, let's say drop tai toshi. Okay, in a drop tai toshi situation, here I do expose my back to my opponent to a degree, but I don't land inside his legs. I land outside his legs. So as we start moving our opponent around, I come in to drop tight, drive the man down. At the time of the throw, I was positioned just outside of my training partner's ankles. So if you'll stand there, I was positioned here, drop tight Toshi, okay? Just outside of his legs. So there was some back exposure, but considerably less than there was in the case of drop Sanagi. Okay, Kataguruma. In Kataguruma, I make a partial turn towards my training partner. We come out like so, I start drawing my training partner's legs in. Kataguruma variations, I made a half turn towards my training partner. So there's some back exposure, but not full back exposure. It's not like a Sanagi situation where there's full back exposure. And here, okay? So you can see the back exposure comes in degrees, okay? And obviously the more back exposure, where you land between your opponent's legs with 100% back exposure, I'm not going to say it's wrong, but I'm going to say there's considerable risk here. Now contrast this with a throw like Sasai Sori Kobayashi, okay? When my opponent comes in and we get hands on that man like so. Here I'm throwing my opponent forwards, but there's almost no back exposure on my training partner, okay? At all times my chest faced my opponent. So very, very safe, very appropriate for the sport of Jiu-Jitsu, okay? Zero back exposure in this case. An ankle pick, okay? My opponent comes out, makes grips, from here, goes through, and from here, you come in and pick the ankle, okay? In these situations, again, zero back exposure. So this would be a fine example of a takedown passing the criteria of back exposure. There's zero back exposure. So this would be one good indicator that this is an appropriate takedown for the sport of Jiu-Jitsu. So the first criteria we use is back exposure, because that's potentially the most hazardous. The second criteria I use is neck exposure. There are many forms of takedown which expose my neck to my opponent's attacks. This might be in the form of strangleholds, okay, which are obviously very common in the sport of Jiu-Jitsu, and aren't even part of something like wrestling, for example. There's no strangleholds permitted in wrestling, but they're very important in our sport. Let's look at, say, for example, one of the most common takedowns in Jiu-Jitsu, a single leg takedown. As we work with an opponent, come out, he makes grips. From here, we go in from this position. I come in, I hit the single leg. As I come in off my feet, Giancarlo slips the hand in and goes into a loop strangle. If we bring the camera in now, look how Giancarlo passes his hand over the top, goes into a loop strangle, and from here finishes me because my neck was exposed, okay? I got to the takedown, but my neck was exposed. Similarly, with double leg situations, he comes out, makes grips, we come in on our training partner, we go straight in and find ourselves now in a situation where he's right there in the guillotine strangle. As I go down to the floor, I'm now in danger of being strangled. Even if I don't get strangled, I do not score because Giancarlo has control of my head. As long as my head is controlled, no score. Giancarlo now realizes the strangle's not working. He pops up to his feet, hip highs, and I didn't score because at no point did I put him down with control for 3 seconds with my head free. As long as he controls my head with the threat of a submission, no score. Okay? So there's a sense in which neck exposure is a big deal for us as Jiu-Jitsu students. I'm not saying don't use single legs. Single legs is a great move for Jiu-Jitsu, but it does come undeniably with the danger of neck exposure. There's some danger of strangulation from the front. There's some danger of my opponent controlling my head so I don't score takedown points and him scrambling back up to his feet before a score can be made. So this is the second criteria that we often use for judging the appropriateness of a takedown for Jiu-Jitsu. How much neck exposure is there? You will see that there are other takedowns where there's zero neck exposure. Literally zero, okay? Say, for example, a collar drag, okay? If we get into a situation where my opponent grips up, and from here I put 2 hands on my training partner and start to turn the corner. When we go into any form of collar drag position, there is zero neck exposure on my part. At no point is my neck exposed to my opponent, and it's an easy thing for us now to come up and start attacking the position. Okay? So that would be a good example of a takedown highly appropriate to the sport of Jiu-Jitsu. Zero neck exposure. Also zero back exposure in the case of a collar drag. The third criteria which I often use and which doesn't get mentioned very often, is belt exposure. When you participate in Jiu-Jitsu, you're wearing a belt, and that belt is an important thing. The belt is located right at your center of gravity. And if your opponent gets a hold of it and he knows what he's doing, that can cause a lot of problems for you. So let's look, say for example, single leg takedown. Okay, one of the more common takedowns in the sport of Jiu-Jitsu. My opponent comes out, he makes grips. From here, I go on to my training partner, I come in and I hit the single leg. He gets a hold of my belt now. When I come up off the floor, my opponent can counter me now with a very strong uchimata. If he knows what he's doing, and from here I can be thrown very, very strongly because he's got control of my center of gravity. He can use the belt grip to pull me onto my toes. Look at my feet. I get pulled onto my toes. I get very, very light here. And from this position, I'm going to fly. Okay? He might also throw with sumigation. I come in here, he gets a hold of my belt. If he jumps inside my legs now, that's a serious problem. Okay? And he can use the belt to control my center of gravity, take my weight onto my toes, and throw me with a beautiful sumigation counter throw. Okay? So belt exposure is a big deal in the sport of Jiu-Jitsu. Now, there are obviously many takedowns that don't expose the belt whatsoever. And these are very, very useful for us. Okay? So for example, Sasai Koyashi. My opponent comes out, next grips. From here, we get hands on our man. From a situation where I throw, the Sasai at no point was my belt exposed to my training partner. And as a result, it's very, very safe in terms of back exposure, neck exposure, and belt exposure. So this would be a highly appropriate takedown for the sport of Jiu-Jitsu. Now, another form of exposure that we really worry about a lot in the sport of Jiu-Jitsu is weight exposure. There's nothing worse when it comes time to do a takedown, getting caught underneath your opponent's body weight. Okay, so let's say for example, double leg takedown. If we're playing with double legs, my opponent comes in and makes grips, and from here I start to circle. I set up a good opportunity to go into my double leg. If I get caught underneath my opponent's body weight in a heavy sprawl, I'm caught underneath Giancarlo's body weight. It's easy for him now to come around to the corner and take advantage of the fact that I was caught underneath the man's body weight. Okay? Single legs. I come in on a leg. If the leg comes back and away under these circumstances, I'm caught underneath Giancarlo's body weight. Okay? And it's very likely now you're going to end up in very compromised situations. Now, I'm not saying don't do double legs and single legs. I'm going to be showing double legs and single legs in a lot of detail in this first video. If you maintain your posture, it's not a problem. Giancarlo, if we bring the camera around, if I have a good upright posture in here and he goes into a heavy sprawl, because of my posture being strong here, it's an easy thing for me to bear his body weight. I can carry it easily because of posture. Okay, if I start turning the corner, I'm training partner now, we can start putting the man down to the floor. But if my posture fails me, and I have to bear his body weight, that's a serious issue. Okay, so a large part of how much body weight exposure is going to work for or against you will be bound up with your technical expertise in the use of these moves. If you've got strong posture in single legs and double legs, it's not a problem. If you've got postural problems, you're going to run into big problems with people pressing their weight down on top of you. There are other takedowns, ankle pick, where there's almost no danger of weight exposure. In an ankle pick, here, even if I miss Giancarlo's legs, no part of his body is on top of my body. Okay, if he sprawls from here, doesn't mean anything. It's not on top of me. Okay, there's no body weight exposure in a heel pick, an ankle pick. That's why I favor it so much in your early development in the standing position. Contrast this with double leg situation, where if my posture fails, you're caught underneath him, chest on back, a lot of issues ahead of you. Okay, so the ankle pick would be a fine example of a takedown in which there is no danger of body weight exposure. Double legs and single legs, there is going to be some danger. It will depend on your postural integrity. You got good posture, it's not an issue. You got bad posture, it's a major issue. So that's the next criteria that we use to judge the applicability of a given takedown to the sport of Jiu-Jitsu. How much exposure to my opponent's body weight and chest to back positions will there be when I attempt a takedown? You see that some takedowns have zero body weight exposure, ankle picks for example, collar drags. Others have some, depending on your posture, more than others. Okay.